Welcome back to the Historical Fiction Story Podcast. We're diving deep today into Men on the Moon by Lonnie Russo. It's just incredible how he blends this personal journey with such a huge historical event.
It really is, yeah. Russo captures the excitement of the moon landing, but he also gets that quiet anxiety of a young man kind of on the edge of adulthood.
Right. Okay, so it's 1969 in New Jersey. Our main character, Dominic, he's turning 19,
Okay.
but it's also his brother's wedding day.
Wow.
And also the day of the moon landing.
Oh, wow.
Talk about a backdrop for a coming-of-age story.
It's like the universe was like, hey, let's make this birthday unforgettable. But instead of celebrating, Dalem's kind of wrestling with these feelings of being invisible, almost like he's a backup to his brother.
Exactly. And then you've got this waiter, Barty. He enters the picture. Their connection is so unexpected, it adds this whole other layer to Dom's internal struggle.
Speaking of layers, Russo's use of sensory detail is amazing. He doesn't just say it's a hot summer night, he makes you feel it. Remember the description of those melting limousine streamers?
Oh, yeah, I totally picture that. You're right there in that sticky New Jersey heat.
Wow.
And then you have this sharp contrast of the radio broadcast announcing the moon landing. It's like this local and global thing all happening at the same time.
Yeah, and through it all, you have these little human moments that ground the story, Like Aunt Rosie worrying that the rain in New Jersey will somehow mess with the astronauts.
Oh, she's hilarious. Little superstitious. And some humor, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
But I think Aunt Rosie also represents something deeper. Her concern for the astronauts, even if it's superstition-based, shows how this huge event, this moon landing, was really personal for a lot of people.
It makes you think about how history isn't just dates and big events. It's about how they affect individual lives.
Absolutely. And for Dom, this whole historical backdrop seems to amplify his feeling of being overshadowed by his brother. It's his birthday, but everyone's focused on the wedding and the moon landing. He's looking for a connection, for someone to see him.
And then he meets Barty, who's like the complete opposite of Dom in a lot of ways. Full of energy, has this almost childlike dream of finding the Loch Ness Monster.
It's such an interesting contrast. You have Dom feeling stuck and Barty with this free spirit, always searching for something. Their personalities clash, but there's a spark between them.
And that scene where Barty's looking at the moon, waving, convinced the astronauts are waving back, it's so whimsical you can't help but smile.
It's fascinating how that simple act, Barty believing in the impossible, becomes this turning point for Dom. He's felt invisible all day, and suddenly he's in this shared moment of joy.
I think that's what I love most about this story. It's about finding connection in the most unexpected places. Even with this huge historical event happening, these two characters find comfort, a sense of belonging in each other.
Reminds us that sometimes the most meaningful connections happen when you least expect them. And for those of you who love stories like this, check out the Historical Fiction Story Collection. You can find a link in the show notes.
It's like a goldmine of stories that take you to different times and explore what it means to be human. But let's get back to Dom and Barty. Their conversation flows so naturally. They talk about the moon landing, their dreams, their worries. It's in this simple parking lot conversation that a deeper connection starts to form.
Yeah. It's interesting how Russo uses their conversation to hint at Dom's issues. He talks about feeling like a backup to his brother, kind of like the backup crew for Apollo 11.
Oh, wow. I didn't even pick up on that. That's a really clever way to tie Dom's struggles to the moon landing.
Exactly. It's like even though the astronauts are the ones in the history books, there are so many people like Dom on their own journeys feeling overlooked.
I think it's so relatable, right? I think everyone's felt like a backup at some point.
For sure. And then there's that moment when Dom realizes he's attracted to Barty. It's subtle, but it says a lot, especially for 1969.
Yeah, it's handled so delicately. Russo doesn't spell it out, but you get it through Dom's observations.
Exactly. And the fact that this happens during the moon landing adds another layer. This event symbolizes progress, pushing boundaries, and Dom's discovering something new about himself, something that maybe challenges what's considered normal.
It's like Dom's growing up alongside the whole world. Russo weaves those stories together so well.
It makes you think about identity, finding yourself, especially in a time of so much change. The late 60s was all about progress, but also people resisting that change.
It's like a reminder that even with all that going on, people were having their own personal revolutions. Speaking of revolutions, let's talk about that ending. Tomorrow, everything will be different. So powerful.
Right. It's hopeful, but also a little mysterious. We don't know what'll be different for Dom, but you get the sense that meeting Barty has changed him forever.
Like he's at the start of a brand new chapter, and we get to imagine what might happen.
That's the great thing about historical fiction, right? Exploring the past while thinking about now and the future.
Definitely. It's not just escaping, it's understanding what it means to be human, no matter the time or situation. And if you're looking for more stories like that, check out the Historical Fiction Story Collection. The link's in the show notes.
Such a great resource for anyone who wants to travel through time and discover new authors.
Now, let's talk about Russo's writing. He's a master of dialogue. It reveals so much about the characters and feels so real.
His ear for dialogue is spot on. The way he captures Aunt Rosie's voice, Nan Chabowski's, even Barty with his slang, it's remarkable.
It's like you're hearing them talk as you read. Adds so much realism. Really pulls you into that 1969 world.
And it's not just the words, it's what's not said. There's so much beneath the surface, especially between Dom and Barty. Those silences, the hesitations, they speak volumes.
Right. Russo trusts the reader to fill in the gaps, pick up on those cues. Such a skilled writer.
And his use of imagery and symbolism. Remember when Dom and Barty are sharing a cigarette in the parking lot?
Oh, yeah. It's almost like the smoke represents their desires, the tension between them.
Exactly. And sharing that cigarette adds a layer of closeness. A small detail, but such a powerful symbol of their bond.
It's the little things that make this story so rich, something to really think about.
Yeah.
You can tell Russo put so much thought into every part of it. Yeah, it's like each piece, the dialogue, the setting, it all works together to create this world you could really get lost in.
Right. And speaking of setting, I think it's cool how Russo uses 1969 to look at social change and those big cultural shifts happening then.
Oh, totally. The moon landing is such a powerful symbol of progress, what humans can achieve, but it's also happening when there's so much unrest, the Vietnam War, the Civil Rights Movement,
It's a wild mix, isn't it? This amazing thing that brings people together, and at the same time, all this tension, uncertainty about what's coming next.
It creates this atmosphere, complex, and it kind of mirrors what Dom's going through, right?
Yeah.
Figuring out who he is, where he belongs, while the world around him is changing so much.
Yeah, and that's what makes Men on the Moon so powerful. It captures a specific time, but it's also about these universal things: identity, belonging, searching for connection. That stuff matters no matter when you're living.
Absolutely. And it's not just those huge historical events. It's the small moments that show what life was like in '69. Music on the radio, clothes, how people talk, it all feels so real.
Like Russo drops you right into that time. Almost smell the cigarette smoke, hear that radio crackling.
And he nails that energy, the excitement and nervousness all mixed up. Just brilliant.
It reminds you that history isn't just something you read about, people lived it, Men on the Moon gives you a glimpse into that in a way that's smart and really moving.
It also makes you think about how far we've come since then, but also what still needs to change.
So true. Progress isn't always a straight line, right? Every generation faces its own challenges and its own chances to make things better.
And I think that's one of the best things about historical fiction. Connecting with the past, learning from it, so we can try to build a better future.
Definitely. If you want to explore more of this genre, I'd highly recommend checking out the Historical Fiction Story Collection.
Yeah, such a great resource if you're into different time periods, want to discover new authors. You'll find a link in the show notes.
It's a whole world of stories waiting to be read.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive into Men on the Moon. Really enjoyed talking about this one with you.
Me too. It's a story that sticks with you, makes you think about your place in the world, the connections that matter in your life.
Thank you for listening to this deep dive into Men on the Moon, here on the Historical Fiction Story Podcast. We'll be back soon with another great story. Until then, happy reading.